Hi, everyone. Welcome. Bienvenue. Today we have two special guests joining us, Zineb Lahiane and Alexandra Scott from the PSC, and they're going to be walking us through, how to do some of that write-up for our competitions. And if you have any questions throughout the segment, please use the Q&A function. You can ask your questions there, and if you want to make comments or share your thoughts, make sure to put that in the chat space today. Today I completely forgot to let Josh know that he was supposed to be doing this introduction, so that's why I jumped on. I'm Marcella Popovich. I'm the virtual event manager from the Federal Youth Network. And we welcome Alexandra and Zineb. And again, we're going to get started. I'm going to start sharing the PowerPoint. And so 1 second, please.
Thanks, Marcella. Merci, Marcella. So while Marcella is putting up the PowerPoint, I can start with a little introduction. Je peux commencer avec une petite introduction. So as Marcella has presented us, Zineb and I are here on behalf of the Public Service Commission. So we're both HR advisors, and I can start by talking a little bit about myself, and then I'll let Zineb introduce herself a little bit. So I've worked for the Federal Public Service for approximately 5 or 6 years. I started as a casual employee, and I started as an executive assistant. J'ai commencé comme adjointe exécutive dans un poste en administration. And then, as many of you are doing today, I applied to a whole bunch of processes on GC jobs. I applied to a job as an HR advisor, which is the role that I'm currently doing now, and I was lucky to get the position. So I have now been an HR advisor for about a year, so I'm new-ish into this role, but I love it. And if you have any questions specific to HR, me and Zineb can give you some guidance on how we like our jobs if you have any questions. And then we'll pass the virtual mic over to Zineb, who can tell you a little bit about how she came into the public service. Je vais laisser ma collègue Zineb s'introduire un peu.
Hi everyone, bonjour tout le monde. So my name is Zineb. Alex already kind of introduced us at the beginning. Je suis aussi conseillère en ressources humaines dans la même équipe que Alex. So I kind of entered the government differently than Alex. I actually started off as an FSWEP student. And when I finished my degree, I managed to secure a full-time permanent position within a department outside of the PSC. Alors, j'ai commencé premièrement en étant étudiante, et après ça, on m'a offert un poste permanent comme adjointe en ressources humaines. Puis maintenant, j'ai devenu conseillère en ressources humaines à la Commission de la fonction publique. I've always enjoyed human resources. I studied human resources in my undergraduate degree. And as Alex said, we are super excited to be here and to just kind of talk to you about different topics and kind of explore the traditional selection process within the Government of Canada. So on a vraiment hâte.
Awesome. Thank you, Zineb. I think she's told you a little bit about what we'll be going over today, but just to recap it, so we'll be talking a little bit about the pre-screening questions. On va parler un peu des questions de présélection lorsque vous appliquez sur Emploi GC, and also some of the competencies that you may see on some posters. So Marcella, if you could launch the first poll question for everybody. And the question is, how many of you feel that answering a screening question is a skill that takes time to master? Combien d'entre vous pensent que répondre à une question de présélection est une compétence qui prend du temps à maîtriser? So I'll give you a couple minutes to answer. Or a couple seconds, I should say. I can't see the results. I don't know.
I'll share them.
Are they listed yet?
They're coming in fast and furious. Okay, so 5 more seconds.
Awesome. Perfect. I'm too quick for you. Awesome. So I see 81%. Yes, it's hard, and I agree with you. We have mastered a little bit answering the screening questions, and I really think that the more screening questions that you answer, the easiest it can get. And on this topic, I wanted to give you a few tips that we always suggest that candidates do when they answer these screening questions. So the first one, and I think the most important one, is to use a Word document whenever you're completing your answers. So this way, you can first of all save your answers. You can use your answer on more than one poster. So let's say you're applying for a whole bunch of HR positions or a whole bunch of admin positions. If you're asking a competency or an experience, for example, that's do you have experience with customer service, you can reuse that same answer more than once. And another thing too is that when you're in a Word document, you can use the spell check feature. If you have like a special software like ainsi, you can make sure that you don't have any spelling mistakes as well. And another thing that I want to mention to everyone, because I hope that it doesn't happen to you, is whenever you fill out the screening questions on GC Jobs, there's going to be a little sentence in red at the top that says your question will time out after 60 minutes of inactivity. And this means not that if you're not typing, it means if you're not pressing the button save. So you could be furiously typing away for 4 hours answering all these questions. If you haven't pressed that save button in 60 minutes, unfortunately, you're going to lose all your work. So that's one of the reasons that we always say, put it in that Word document. Once you're all happy with your answers and you've had a chance to review them, just copy paste them into the boxes and you're sure you won't lose any of your work. Donc, nous vous suggérons toujours d'utiliser un document Word. En utilisant le document Word, vous pouvez premièrement réutiliser les questions pour plus qu'un poste. Donc, si vous appliquez sur des postes qui sont similaires, vous pouvez utiliser les mêmes exemples. Aussi, vous pouvez vous assurer qu'il n'y a aucune faute d'orthographe en utilisant la petite fonction spell check ou un logiciel tel Candidature pour s'assurer qu'il n'y a aucune faute d'orthographe. Et puis, un petit rappel que la page va faire un petit time-out après 60 minutes d'inactivité. Inactivité, ça veut dire que vous n'avez pas pesé le bouton sauvegarder en 60 minutes. Donc, on vous suggère de toujours mettre ça dans un document Word, ensuite copier-coller les questions dans les bonnes cases. So we can move on to the next, the first slide. So what is merit and how does it apply to a screening question? Qu'est-ce que le mérite et comment est-il utilisé dans une question de présélection? So did you know that appointments, either internal or external, to the public service shall be made on the basis of merit? So, savez-vous que les nominations internes ou à l'externe à la fonction publique sont fondées sur le mérite? So this also means if you are a student and you're bridged into the public service, the HR advisor will have to ensure that you meet merit. In order to be appointed to any job, you have to be able to demonstrate that you meet merit. And this is when screening questions can kind of come in. So every position in the federal public service has what's called a statement of merit criteria. So it's just what the candidate needs to have. So those are the experiences and the competencies they have to have in order to do that position. So the way that hiring departments can evaluate to see if you have the merit for that position is through exams, interviews, tests, and screening questions. So they can actually use the answers that you provide for a screening question to demonstrate that you have that experience or that competency for that position. Donc, les ministères d'embauche peuvent utiliser vos questions de présélection afin de prouver que vous avez le mérite pour le poste, que vous avez les compétences et les expériences demandées pour le poste. So whenever you see a poster on GC Jobs, you might notice that there's two different sections. So there's one section called Essential Qualifications, and then there's a second section called Asset Qualifications, or it sometimes says in parentheses, may be needed. So if you're planning on applying to a position on GC Jobs, you have to make sure that you absolutely meet those essential qualifications. So when you go on to the screening question page, there's going to be a box that says, for example, do you have experience working with customers? And then there'll be a box that says yes or no. If this experience is an essential qualification, so it says it is needed for the position, and if you answer no, unfortunately, your application will be rejected. So you have to put yes to those essential qualifications, and then a department could determine whether you meet merit based on the answer that you provide to that question. Now, that doesn't say that they may not evaluate you again on that same question in a test or an interview, or they may decide to use that screening question. And then when it comes to those asset qualifications or asset competencies or things that say may be needed for the position, you could at this point put no in the screening question. And if you don't have that experience, if it's an asset, you can still put no and be considered for the position. However, if you do have that asset qualification, we highly suggest that you answer yes and that you provide a reason, because asset qualifications could be invoked at any point in a selection process. So for example, if they have a whole lot of applications that came through and they want to just do like a first screening of applications, they may say, okay, well, the first screening of applications that we'll do is those who have answered yes to at least 2 asset qualifications, for example. So that's where those may come in. So please put them if you have them. However, if you don't have those assets, you could still apply to the position. Donc, si vous n'avez pas les qualifications qui sont considérées comme des atouts, vous pouvez quand même postuler sur Emploi GC. Cependant, et si vous répondez non à la question de présélection quand c'est un atout, vous pouvez quand même être considéré pour le poste. Mais si vous avez cette expérience, cette compétence-là qui est considérée comme un atout, on vous encourage fortement de sélectionner oui et ensuite de mettre la justification et l'explication et répondre à la question de présélection dans la petite boîte en dessous. So we can go to the second poll question. On peut passer à la prochaine question de sondage. So is there only one right answer when answering screening questions on GC Jobs? Est-ce qu'il y a seulement une bonne réponse quand on répond aux questions de présélection sur Emploi GC?
And the answers are coming in fast and furious again. Yeah. So we'll give it a few more.
Perfect. So do you think that HR advisors, when they're reviewing the question, they are looking for one answer only, or do you think they're looking for only one keyword, or do you think that you have to include one keyword or 2 keywords in order to be considered or to move to the next step? So 81% with the no, that is the right answer. So no, there's no specific answer. Il n'y a pas seulement une bonne réponse. La bonne réponse était non. So what you need to have in order to be successful with the screening question is that you demonstrate that you have that competency, or that you have that experience in depth using concrete examples. So these examples will really vary from one person to another. So if, again, I'll stick to the same experience that I said before. Do you have experience with customer service? You would put yes if you had that experience, and my experience with customer service at a restaurant can be completely different with somebody else's customer service who is maybe working as a camp counselor and their customers were parents and children, for example. And another myth that I want to debust for you, un petit mythe que j'aimerais vous dire aujourd'hui, is that there's no keyword that you can put in. So we often hear people say like, oh, there's the keywords, you have to put in those screening questions, otherwise your application won't be selected to move to the next step, or the people with the keywords will be selected first. That is completely false. There's no artificial intelligence computer system going through your screening questions. It's a human being. So the only time that a computer does any sort of rejection or accepting is in those essential qualifications. You have to put yes. if it's an essential qualification and you put no, at that point you wouldn't be considered. But you could put yes, and in the text box where you're asked to put your answer, you can put, just kidding, I don't actually have it. And I can guarantee you that an HR person will be reading your answer. We really, really read every single answer that comes through. And then it's determined based on merit to see if you meet that qualification or that experience or that competency. So again, make sure that when you're answering your screening questions, the answer is complete, and my colleague Zineb will go through with you how to make sure your answer is complete, but I'm just giving you a little bit of background info before we get really deep into answering those screening questions. And please remember that it's often a human resources advisor that's reading your screening questions. So make sure that she or he fully understands what you're trying to say in your example. For example, if it's a very specific scientific experience and you're using a whole bunch of acronyms, the person reading your answer may not fully understand. So make sure that you're putting the acronyms in whole. Like, for example, I work at the Public Service Commission, but if I was just writing, yeah, I work at the PSC, the person that's reading this on the other side won't know necessarily when I'm saying the PSC, which is an acronym we use all the time. So just make sure you're putting your acronyms in whole and that it's easy for the person that's reading your pre-screening question to read and to understand. And we can go into the next slide, which is
Alex, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A related to screening. So did you want to take it now?
We can do, yeah. Zineb, did you want to take a couple questions now before we go into the STAR method?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so someone's asking, I have heard that the wording for the competency or experience should be using the same as in the posting. Is this the case, or are all applications looked at?
I can answer this one if you don't mind, Alex.
Go ahead, Zineb.
Yeah, so definitely what you should always start with in your pre-screening response, your kind of introductory sentence should really be kind of related to the initial question. It's not mandatory, but it is a good practice because it'll just help you kind of relate your answer to the initial question by just simply repeating it. It also kind of shows the reader that you are responding directly to the question. So I would say yes. Do you have anything else to add, Alex?
No, yeah, that's perfect. I hope that answers that question. Was there another question, Marcella, from the chat? Yeah.
Yes, related to screening questions, there's one. Can I put any of my experience for the screening answer? For example, if I acquire the specific experience in volunteering, either in the community or at work, by participating in committees.
100%. Yep, so all experience count. That goes from volunteering experience, school experience, experience in the workplace. You can definitely include that in this the screening questions. And we're going to touch on that a little bit further in the presentation. I believe Zineb will be speaking about that.
Yeah, exactly. And I just wanted to add something to Alex's response as well. It's important to read the poster and read exactly what they're asking for, because sometimes they will specify that they want a specific work example. And if that's the case, then you should be using a word example to avoid you getting screened out. Otherwise, as Alex said, use any example you gained throughout your college, university life, work experience, etc.
Yeah, and another thing to add to what Zineb said, it made me think of it. Sometimes there'll be like a little astérix, a little star, il va avoir une petite étoile, that's going to say significant experience in. And then you'll read underneath and it'll be with a star and it'll say significant, like in this case, significant means a minimum of 2 years experience in this. So that's just something to look at 100%. Make sure you're really reading the poster, the entire poster. I know it can be long. Assurez-vous de lire toute la fiche. Je sais que ça peut être long, mais il y a toujours de l'information pertinente par rapport au poste et par rapport aux questions de présélection et qu'est-ce qui est attendu de vous. Was there another question or shall we?
No, we'll move on.
We'll move on. Awesome. So the recommended method to answer these screening questions, donc la méthode suggérée pour répondre aux questions de présélection is the STAR method. C'est la méthode STAR. So STAR stands for situation. Donc, décrivez la situation. Tâche, donnez des détails sur ce que vous deviez faire. Action, indiquez les actions que vous avez entreprises et finalement les résultats. Donc, décrivez les résultats de la situation et de l'impact. So I have broken down these STARs into questions that I ask myself when I'm answering screening questions. So S would stand for when, where, who. Donc S, ça serait qui, quand, où. And then the T would be more like what. So what did you have to do? Le T serait plus quoi. Ensuite, A serait comment. A would be how. So how did you do the task? And then R, I don't have a question for you. R is more just the impact and the solution, one or two kind of closing remarks to do with your examples. So I will pass my virtual microphone over to my colleague Zineb, who's going to speak to you a little bit about some competencies you can see on some posters, and she'll provide you with an answer, a suggested answer using the STAR method.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. Merci, Alex. Alors maintenant, on va passer à la troisième question de sondage. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to the third poll question. So the question is, do all posters on GC Jobs have the same competencies? In French, est-ce que toutes les affiches sur Emploi GC ont les mêmes compétences? So I'll give everyone a few minutes to answer.
We'll just give it a few more seconds, Zina.
Yep, no problem. Wonderful. So I see here that you've all selected the right answer. La réponse est non. I'm really glad to see that. It makes my job a lot easier today. So we'll move on to the next slide. So in fact, competencies do vary widely from one poster to another, as you guys all answered, and of course from one type of job to another. Alors si je peux vous donner un petit exemple, ça serait un poste d'adjointe je sais pas, en administration, comparé à un poste de scientiste ou d'ingénieur. Ils vont vraiment avoir des compétences vraiment différentes et puis même d'un poste à un autre, ils vont être vraiment différents. Alors, les gestionnaires d'embauche ont beaucoup de flexibilité quand ça vient aux compétences et à d'autres critères qu'ils incluent dans leur fiche. Alors ici, juste pour vous donner un petit exemple des compétences que vous pouviez possiblement voir sur une affiche, on a inclus une petite liste sur ce diapo des compétences essentielles. So core competencies that you may potentially see on a poster. We've kind of included a bit of a list of them on this slide. Now, this list is not all you'll see on a poster. It's actually what you'll end up seeing on your performance management agreements. These are core competencies that every single public service employee has to meet in their performance management agreements. So this is just kind of give you a bit of an example. However, you won't see them on all posters. So some other examples may include written oral communication, attention to detail, dependability, and many more. But the ones that we have here on this poster, on this slide, are demonstrating integrity and respect, thinking things through, working effectively with others, and showing initiative and being action-oriented. Alors, c'est juste pour vous donner un petit exemple des compétences que vous pouvez possiblement voir dans des affiches, mais sûrement dans votre entente de rendement. So now we can move on to the next slide. So now let's just take a look at a bit of an example of a screening question. Alors, la question est la suivante. Donne-nous un exemple d'une situation lorsque vous avez fait preuve d'initiative et que vous étiez orienté vers l'action. So to repeat the question in English, please provide an example of a situation when you showed initiative and were action-oriented. Now let's take a look at the answer. Maintenant, regardons la réponse à cette question. So we want to kind of draw your attention to the we aspect of this answer and kind of let you take a second to think about the way the answer is actually structured, whether you should be using we in this answer or not. Is it detailed enough? Do you feel it's sufficient? Is it too broad? Kind of think about that a little bit. Alors ici, on voulait juste vous donner un petit exemple d'une question et réponse. Vous n'allez pas nécessairement avoir à répondre à une question exactement comme celle-là dans une affiche, mais c'est juste un petit exemple pour vous démontrer un peu comment possiblement répondre à une question de présélection. Utilisons possiblement la méthode STAR que ma collègue Alex a déjà introduit au début de la présentation. So, we'll kind of take a look at how we can use the STAR method to potentially respond to a question similar to this one. Again, you won't necessarily see it in all posters or in all processes, but it's really just a very small example of what you may potentially see and how you can potentially answer it. So after having taken a bit of a look at the question and answer on this slide, if we'll just move on to the next slide now. We'll answer poll question 4. So would you say that the answer is complete? Est-ce que la réponse est complète?
Ten more seconds.
OK, great. Parfait. Alors, vous avez répondu non. That is the correct answer. Again, I'm very glad to see that. So the correct answer is no. It is certainly not complete. It's very broad and it's too general. It definitely does not encompass enough detail to be able to provide the reader or the screener with enough information regarding how you meet that particular question. So we've actually gone ahead and created a complete answer for all of you to show you how you could use the STAR method to structure your response for this type of question. Alors, la réponse est vraiment pas assez détaillée. Elle n'est pas complète du tout. Alors, on a vraiment, on a pris l'opportunité de créer un type de réponse. C'est pas la seule réponse que vous pouvez avoir pour ce type de question, mais c'est juste un petit exemple. Alors ici, on a un peu illustré comment vous pouvez utiliser la méthode STAR pour répondre à une question comme celle-ci. So, the STAR method is something, just a little tool that you can use to kind of structure your response for this type of question. As Alex already mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, it's an important method because it helps you kind of take an example and then put that example into context and be able to really explain your example to someone else who really has no idea what you're talking about or has never heard of this example that you're giving. So we've color coordinated the potential response on this slide to kind of illustrate the different components of the STAR method. So in purple, we've given a brief description of what the situation entailed. So in this case, I apologize for the font being very tiny, but just bear with me. I'm going to try to kind of walk through it and explain it in detail. So in purple, we've given a brief description of the situation. The situation was that the applicant had to develop a written proposal on the ways to improve mental health in elementary schools along with his classmates. So he kind of explained what the overall project was, and gave details of what the situation entailed. Then in blue, we have the task. In this case, the task involved the applicant to come up with a plan of action where everyone on their team would be responsible for something in particular. That was really the main task, but the applicant went on explaining more details of the task. Now, I'm not going to necessarily read everything that we've written there, but this kind of gives you a bit of a sense of the difference between situation and task, and really elaborating what you did within the project. So in yellow, we have the actions that the candidates took to complete the task that he had to complete. So here we explained in detail the actions taken by the applicant. And again, here we didn't give as many details in the action area because we simply had a small slide and didn't want to overcrowd it too much. It's already very overcrowded as a response. But we do want to let you know to give as much detail as you can in the action description, simply because you want to be able to clearly explain a specific response to the screener so that they understand in detail the steps that you took to accomplish a specific task. So actually, if we just go back to the English slide, sorry. Thank you. I'm just going to wrap up the last little part, which is the results section of the answer. So in red here, we have the result. So basically, just to sum it up here, the candidate ended up finishing the project in time. He ended up getting a better mark, or he ended up increasing his average mark because of the project. So we see that the result was a positive result, and it had a positive impact on his overall mark. So again, this is only one example. There is not one right answer. You can respond depending on what you did, what your tasks were, the actions that you specifically took. Obviously, don't copy and paste this response on just any screening question, but this is really just a format that you can choose to use when responding to any given pre-screening question and even interview questions. So this is just a bit of an example. Alors maintenant, passons à la diapo en français, s'il te plaît. Parfait. So, ici, pour la première partie, alors, oups, OK, en violet, on a mis comme une petite description de la situation, puis ici, l'applicant a vraiment expliqué sa situation, qui était de développer un type de rapport écrit contenant plusieurs types de façons comme maintenir la santé mentale dans des écoles élémentaires avec ses collègues. Alors ici, il a expliqué un peu en bleu les tâches qu'il a dû accomplir. Et puis, il a parlé un peu de comment il a dû diviser les tâches entre ses différents collègues, puis vraiment compléter le projet. So, c'est ça. Donc, en jaune, on a les actions qu'a pris les candidats. Ici, on explique vraiment en détail les actions du postulant dans l'accomplissement du projet ou de la tâche. Puis, il était vraiment responsable de la compilation des données. Alors, il explique un peu comment il a utilisé Excel et Word pour démontrer les données que son équipe a recueillies pendant leur recherche. Après ça, il parle un peu du fait qu'il s'est assuré que ses camarades lui fournissaient les informations nécessaires pour faire son travail. Puis finalement, j'essaie juste de lire un peu ce qu'on a écrit ici. En rouge, on a le résultat. Ici, on explique un peu qu'ils ont pu terminer le projet à temps et que le postulant a eu une bonne note sur le projet au total. I do want to point out here that this is only one example. C'est juste une seule exemple de qu'est-ce que vous pouvez répondre, mais c'est sûrement pas, ça va pas être la même pour tous les différents types de questions dans différents types de processus. Perfect. So we can move on to the next slide. So this is just a little reminder. Your example does not need to be work-related, as my colleague Alex already mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. It can certainly be an example of your choice. However, as I kind of responded to a question before, we do encourage you to read the screening question carefully, as some organizations do specify that they want you to use a specific work-related example. But en général, ça peut être un exemple d'un projet d'école, un stage ou un projet d'internat, peut-être un type d'activité que vous avez fait ou d'autres activités de bénévolat. Par contre, l'exemple doit être relié aux qualifications du poste auquel vous appliquez. Alors, just keep that in mind when you are responding to screening questions. Alors maintenant, je vais passer le micro virtuel à ma collègue Alex pour terminer notre présentation.
There are a couple of questions related to this, so I think that maybe we could take a minute. We're getting a lot of questions around how long should the answers be? And we're also getting a question en français, and it was around the language, right? Like the French takes, you need a lot more words. Avez-vous des conseils pour les applications en français? Je suis toujours déchirée parce que nous avons autant d'espace pour répondre aux questions en français et en anglais, alors que les français demandent plus d'espace. So there's, again, the question about length.
Yeah, so, and Zeb, please correct me if I'm wrong, but actually on GC Jobs, donc sur Emploi GC, ils viennent juste d'enlever la limite de mots qu'on a pour répondre à une question de présélection. Justement, tu as complètement raison. Comme vous avez même vu dans notre exemple, l'exemple en français, ça prend plus de mots. On le sait que ça prend plus de mots. Et puis, on avait des candidats francophones, justement, qui disaient, ben, j'ai même pas la chance de répondre à toute ma question parce qu'il y a une limite de mots dans la boîte. Nous avons réglé le problème tout simplement en enlevant la limite de mots et maintenant, vous pouvez vraiment répondre à la question au complet. Cependant, prenez note que des fois, ça va être écrit. So sometimes it's going to be written like on the pre-screening question, like a suggested max amount of words. So sometimes they will limit, say, please limit your answer to approximately 300 words or 300 characters or however it's stated. So I encourage you, this comes back to Zineb's answer saying, please ensure that you do read the poster because those details will be included in there, the length of the expected answer. And if it's like, instead of a pre-screening question, if it's a presentation letter, it might say in there the how many words or how long approximately it should be. However, the system won't cut you off if you go past those words. Donc, le système ne va pas vous arrêter si vous dépassez la limite des mots ou des caractères suggérés dans votre réponse.
Perfect. I'll go to the next slide.
Perfect. So this is our last slide. And we just, before we finish off and go to the questions, I saw some really interesting questions in the Q&A that we can't wait to answer. We just wanted to touch base on self-declaration. So whenever you apply for a position with the Government of Canada on GC Jobs, you're going to be taken to like a second screen menu where there's little green check marks. So you'll put like your name, personal information, education, work location, etc. Screening question. So you need to have a little green check mark next to all of those in order to submit your application. But you'll see a little box, a green box, or I think it's green, with a little exclamation mark. Donc, vous allez voir une petite boîte avec un triangle et un point d'exclamation. Et puis ça, c'est le formulaire d'autodéclaration. That's the self-declaration part. And the reason it's not a check mark or an X is because it's completely voluntary. Donc, la raison pourquoi c'est pas un petit crochet vert, c'est parce que c'est complètement volontaire, mais fortement encouragé. So it is highly encouraged. So in the federal public service, there's 4 employment equity groups that you can find more information about that in the Employment Equity Act. Vous pouvez trouver plus d'informations par rapport aux groupes en équité en matière d'emploi dans l'acte. But they are Aboriginal people, les personnes autochtones, members of visible minorities, les membres des minorités visibles, persons with disability, les personnes en situation de handicap, and the last group, les derniers groupes, ce sont les femmes, women. So if you are part of one or more of those groups, we highly encourage you to self-declare, and that includes all of our programs, including your student programs. The same 4 groups are found in FSWEP if you are applying to FSEP, donc ça inclut nos programmes pour les étudiants. And it's really a way to fully demonstrate your skills and your abilities. So diversity and inclusion is very important for the public service at the moment, and it really helps increase the representation in the federal public service when you self-declare. Donc, en vous autodéclarant, cela aide à améliorer la représentation au sein de la fonction publique fédérale. La diversité et l'inclusion, c'est quelque chose qui est super important en ce moment. Et vous pouvez pleinement démontrer vos compétences, so you can fully demonstrate your abilities when you self-declare. And also, some departments it may be stated in the poster, so have a look at that as well, that they launch a position and say that it's specifically for Aboriginal people. So in that case, if it was a poster that was specifically for an employment equity group, you would have to self-declare at that moment. But otherwise, an organization, and it might say that on your poster as well, an organization may decide to use employment equity groups to staff their positions first. Therefore, if you have not self-declared and you are part of one of those groups, you may have missed an opportunity. So we just wanted to quickly touch base on that before we go to the questions that I think are a little bit more geared towards the screening questions. I saw some about pools versus inventories, which is a question we get a lot, and it is confusing, so we understand. So we could just go to our last slide that just has our social media. Donc, voici l'information pour nous suivre sur les réseaux sociaux. Donc, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we are on there, GC Jobs, and so anytime we post anything new, sometimes we'll post employment opportunities directly on our social media. So that's why we encourage you to follow us so you can stay up to date with all the new posters that are coming up. Et puis, on a aussi des campagnes qui sont lancées une fois par année. We also have annual campaigns for example, recruitment of policy leaders, le recrutement des leaders en politique. We have post-secondary recruitment, which is a program that is for graduates, so people who have a post-secondary degree. And then whenever we launch those new inventories, we always put it on social media. So if you follow us on at least one of the platforms, you won't miss the information. And we've also included our email address. Nous avons aussi inclus notre adresse courriel en bas de la page. So if you have any questions that are more specific to your case, please send them directly to our email instead of answering them today. We can just answer you via email if it's a little bit more personal, and today we'll take the more general questions that could be relevant to everybody here. So, Marcella, did you want to ask the questions, or did you want me to just scroll through them? I don't know if you've already pinpointed some questions you want to start with.
Well, I think there's quite a number of questions related to the pool. So that first question, when the results status indicates included in inventory, and there's a couple about how does that whole getting into a pool work. So I think that having a conversation around how the pools work, etc., Alexandra, will be good.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing I want to touch on is what this include, and then I'll let Zineb take over. I'll start with the include in the inventory, and then Zineb, you can go and show the difference between the inventory and the pool. just so you can prepare mentally that I'm going to toss it back to you. So what included in the inventory means, it can be misleading. So it does not mean that you're automatically in the inventory available to be referred to hiring managers and that your screening questions have been reviewed and that you passed the screening questions. All included in the inventory means is that we have received your application, and that since you've selected yes to all of those essential qualifications, the system has included you in the inventory. However, this doesn't mean that anybody has looked at your questions yet and read them and decided that, yes, you pass all of them, you're going to the next step. So sorry if that is misleading. I do understand. I used to think the same thing when I started and I used to apply. I thought, yes, I'm in, I passed the questions. But an HR person, most likely an HR person, will be communicating with you for the next step in the process if you were successful in those screening questions. So that's the next step that you can expect. So you would submit your application, and then if you were successful in those screening questions, you would be invited to do another assessment, which would probably be a test or an exam. It could be in-person one, less likely with COVID now, but back in the day, I guess I could say it could have been an in-person test, or it could have been an online test at home. So yeah, you'll get an email as a follow-up if you are invited to do the next step in the process. I've muted myself. Zineb, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit the difference between pool versus inventory?
Yeah, sure, not a problem. So that's a question that we receive often, and quite honestly, it's confusing sometimes even to someone who's beginning as maybe a staffing advisor. Kind of understanding the difference between those two aspects can be challenging. So the difference between an inventory and a pool is that an inventory, as Alex mentioned, you're really not assessed. You're kind of in a list, in a huge kind of think of it as a basket of apples. You're one apple within a huge basket of apples that are just sitting in a basket, waiting for someone to kind of pick a couple of them out to figure out what they want to make with them next, right? So that's kind of what an inventory is. Whereas a pool, you can be either fully assessed or you can be partially assessed. In a pool, they've really taken certain steps, whether it be through screening questions, written exam, interview, group interview, a video submission, whatever type of evaluation method they want to do. They can really kind of consider you fully or partially qualified. That's when you'll potentially have to take an SLE test. If it's a bilingual position, that's when you'll most likely have to, as I mentioned before already, write an exam or participate in an interview or whatever the case is. Now, if you are fully assessed, it means that they have really went from point A to point Z, and they have really assessed you on everything that is essential and necessary for the job, or that has been established within the merit criteria and the rating guide. However, being partially assessed means that they have assessed you using certain methods, they have assessed certain criteria, but then they did not assess certain other criteria that may have been present in the statement of merit criteria, which basically kind of explains a bunch of different criteria that you have to meet in order to be found qualified, fully qualified for a position. Now, the way to know if you are fully or partially qualified in a certain process is really to take a look at the email that you're going to receive from HR within that process. They're going to specifically tell you you have been fully qualified in whatever, and then they will tell you what you've been qualified in. If you are partially qualified, they will tell you you have been found partially qualified in so-and-so process, and underneath that, they will tell you what will still need to be assessed in order for you to be fully qualified within that process. So that's kind of a crash course on inventories versus pools. Hopefully that's clear to everyone. And if you have any kind of follow-up questions, feel free to email us. We'd be more than happy to give you more info on that. Yeah.
Awesome. Josh here. So the next question coming in is around FSWEP, or the Federal Student Work Experience Program. And the question is, how should you phrase or present your experience in the FSWEP application to maximize the chances of your resume being forwarded to a specific department, e.g. Global Affairs Canada, ISED, etc. So do you have any thoughts around that? Alors, pour le programme d'emploi des étudiants, est-ce qu'il y a des façons d'écrire votre expérience pour que ce soit ouvert pour un département spécifique comme les affaires mondiales ou quelque chose comme ça?
For sure, I can take this question, Zineb, and then you can add if you want. So applying to FSWEP is completely different than applying on GC jobs. So when you apply to FSWEP, it's a matching system that happens. So when you complete your application in FSWEP, you're not required to answer any screening questions. So the application takes approximately 6 minutes to answer. Donc, c'est une application qui est super rapide à répondre. À appliquer, il n'y a pas de question de présélection dans le programme fédéral d'expérience de travail étudiant. So you will be having some drop-down menus and answer those questions. And then you'll be asked questions like, what type of job interests you? And you can choose up to 5. So I always encourage all students to answer the max of what you can answer, because it just increases those chances of you being matched with hiring managers. So select 5. And then after that, it will ask you, what is your area of study? You can choose up to 3 different types of areas of study. So again, I encourage you to choose 3 different areas of study. I know it's hard. For example, I did a bachelor's in social sciences. So my first thought would be just to put social sciences. However, in my degree, I was required to do tons of other courses. For example, I did French. I did my degree in French, so I did French literature courses. So I could put littérature française, French literature. I also did a lot of courses on Canadian history. So I also included history. And then the last one I included, because I could choose 3, was in fact social sciences. So the same could apply to different disciplines. If you are studying science, choose different. If you're doing just like a degree in biology, you can put biology, you could put microbiology, you could put plant biology. So these again increase the chances of you being matched to a hiring manager. And then the last thing that you will be required to do when you apply to FSWEP is include your CV. And this is now your time to shine. So make sure that your CV is as detailed. So you can have 2 different CVs. One CV when you apply on GC jobs, which is more a snapshot of your CV because you're answering those screening questions. And then you can have your FSWEP CV, which I always suggest is a little bit more detailed. So you can speak at the top, put in like some competencies that you think hiring managers might be interested in. So if you're in an office administration position, put in that if you're proficient in Excel, in Word, if you've taken extra courses in Excel and that you're like very advanced. Those are things that hiring managers are attracted to depending on the position. Or if you've won some scholarships, include the scholarships. If you've won any bursaries, include that. If you're on the dean's list, like things like that. Also, you can totally highlight your volunteer experience. If you're applying, if you're in education and you have tons of volunteer experience with youth, you can totally include that in your application. So yeah, that's why where FSWEP and GC jobs are completely separate applications. They don't look the same at all. And then based on what you included in your application, when a hiring manager, for example, at Global Affairs has a position, they'll be putting in what they're looking for, and they have the exact same fields as you. So the FSWEP application and the manager application have the same fields, and then they'll say what the type of the job is, and they'll say what they want the student to be studying in order for them to be able to do the position. So if it's a position that works on international relations, well, they may choose international relations as an area of study because it would be pertinent. So that's how the matching system works. And then applications are randomly selected and sent to a hiring manager. So there's no way in FSWEP for you to apply to a specific department. It's the departments that will send in a request, and students just get their application forwarded from there. So awesome. I don't know if that was too much info or.
No, I think that's great.
Perfect. So
Yeah, I think you basically summed it up. So just to kind of reiterate a little bit, the key point that we should all take away from that is that what you select on your FSWAP application is really the most important. Your resume is only going to come into play when you are referred to a specific opportunity. But when you're still in the system, kind of waiting for your application to be referred to a specific opportunity or hiring manager, the criteria you select are really the most important. I know when I was an FSWAP student, that was what I always kept in mind. I always kind of went back into the system, played around with my criteria, kind of changed up my 5 areas of interest. I always, of course, had kind of areas that were related to what I was studying, which was a Bachelor of Commerce with specialization in human resource management. So I would always select like human resources, administration. I would select like finance, I don't know, accounting, like or anything that's related. But then I would always make sure to switch it up. And then at one point, I just noticed a bunch of different invitations were coming in kind of back to back. And you'll notice that as you kind of play around with your criteria. So yeah, again, application is like your primary focus, and then your resume, the manager won't look at until after the fact. So that's really how you can increase your chances to get referred.
Absolutely.
And another little note.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add a quick little last thing about FSWAP is to pay attention to your availability, your work availability. So you can choose either part-time, you can choose full-time, or you can choose part-time and full-time. So just make sure that I would suggest that you put both part-time and full-time, because remember that hiring managers might be sending a request for summer students in January. So in your head, if you're thinking I'm only available part-time, but the manager is looking for a student to start in the summer, they start their hiring process quite early. So that's another thing, like Zineb mentioned, to play around with it. Try and see if you change your work availability from only part-time to full-time. If you see you're getting referred to more hiring managers, then that can be an indication. So I would just say, just go part-time and full-time. And then once you get, if somebody communicates with you for position, they'll let you know if it's part-time or full-time. If you're not available, you just simply let them know.
Absolutely. Rapid fire question as we get to the end of the session. Alors, les questions, c'est quel genre d'études avez-vous complété pour obtenir votre poste aux ressources humaines? So what type of study did you complete to get your position in human resources?
En fait, donc, je crois qu'on a déjà un peu répondu à cette question-là. Moi, j'ai fait un bac en sciences sociales à l'Université d'Ottawa. Et puis, Zineb vient juste de dire qu'elle a fait un bac en commerce et ressources humaines. Est-ce que c'était à l'Université d'Ottawa, toi aussi, Zineb?
Oui, exactement. C'était à l'école de gestion Telfer à l'Université d'Ottawa, oui.
Parfait, merci beaucoup. Et je pense que les plans pour les personnes qui travaillent en ressources humaines sont complètement différents pour chaque personne. Les études et les plans de gestion de carrière ont été complètement différents. The next question we have, so maybe this will be the last question as you were running down on our time, but for questions that ask for 2 years of essential experience for a job, does it have to be continuous 2 years in the same job, or can it be 1 year in job A, 1 year in job B?
So I would say refer to the poster for the information about that. It will say it in the poster if it should be in one employer or not. Zineb, did you want to add something? And Josh, I just wanted to answer one more question before we go that I saw in the chat that I really want to get to. But I'll let Zineb.
Yes, no problem.
Yeah, so definitely read the poster. If it mentions that the experience that you have to use is continuous, again, there will be a little star or like a little asterisk. And beside that asterisk, somewhere on the poster, you'll see the definition of continuous, right? So they always have to specify continuous and give you a definition of what that means. But in general, 2 years of continuous doesn't have to be in the same job. It can be 1 year in job A, 1 year in job B, exactly what you said. So it does not have to be within the same job.
Absolutely. And Alexandra, what's the last question you would like to answer?
Yes, for this section? I just saw this and I think it's really important. It's asking, the question is, est-ce que le fait d'appliquer en français pour un poste anglais essentiel nuira aux chances ou vice-versa? Does applying in French for an English essential position hurt your chances or vice versa? No, it does not. You are allowed to apply for the public service in the language of your choice at any time. You can choose to communicate with anybody in HR in the language of your choice at any time. You can be applying to a position that is English essential in French. You can have your resume in French. You can do your interview in French. You can do everything in French, apart from, because it's an English essential position, they will have to evaluate the fact that you are an English speaker. So they may, this may be evaluated through an exam or may be evaluated through an interview question. And when it comes to second language evaluations, of course, you have to do your second languages in the language that is your second language. That's the time where you can't choose. Donc, je vais répéter en français parce que je pense que c'est une question super importante. Vous pouvez appliquer pour tous les postes dans la langue de votre choix. Vous pouvez choisir de faire vos entrevues en français ou en anglais, vos examens en français ou en anglais. Cependant, comme l'exemple ici, le poste est anglais essentiel. Donc, le gestionnaire d'embauche ou les gens vont devoir s'assurer que vous êtes vraiment anglophone. Donc, il se peut que ça soit sous un test qu'ils vont vous demander de démontrer vos compétences en anglais, ou peut-être que ça va être durant l'entrevue. Vous allez faire votre entrevue en anglais, mais ils vont vous demander une des questions en anglais juste pour assurer que vous êtes anglophone. Et le seul temps qu'on ne peut pas choisir la langue, c'est évidemment quand on fait les tests de langue seconde, il faut absolument faire notre test dans notre deuxième langue. So I just really want to touch base on that and really never hesitate to speak to anybody in the language of your choice. And that could even be, even if you're a current public service and you're more comfortable in one language, always ask for that language if you're more comfortable. Zineb, did you have something to add about that?
Non, j'ai rien d'autre à ajouter. Je crois que tu as vraiment bien répondu à la question. So no, I don't have anything else to add.
Awesome. So that takes us to the end of our time. So thanks very much to the two of you for sharing this. I think there's, as we see in the Q&A, there's no shortage of questions. But I think you provided a lot of really excellent responses for the people who were joining us today. And they'll have an opportunity to check out the video later on if they want to consult those, or the email address that you provided as well for any additional questions. But that takes us to the end of today's FYN Virtual Learning Series session. And please join us next week and over the next several weeks, as we have a ton of events. So if you're a student, please join us tomorrow for the full day welcoming event for students in the public service. You can find the registration information for that on our GC Wiki site. And then we will have new offerings next week with 2 sessions, one on public service basics, how to be an interview star, so using the STAR method. And then on June 17th, we have career discussions with newer Indigenous public servants. Alors, merci beaucoup pour nous joindre aujourd'hui. Merci à nos panélistes. Et puis, bonne journée à tous. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.